If presence is already here, why do humans constantly seek direction, guidance, and methods to reach it? This question exposes a subtle paradox in modern psychological and spiritual life. Presence is routinely treated as a destination, something to arrive at through effort, discipline, or correct instruction. Awareness, in this view, is assumed to be incomplete by default and in need of improvement. Yet a strange contradiction appears. The more direction people seek through systems, practices, and techniques, the more disconnected they often feel from the very presence they are trying to access. Instead of clarity, they experience tension. Instead of immediacy, they encounter delay. To understand this contradiction, a distinction must be drawn between presence as immediate awareness and direction as a cognitive strategy. Direction is a tool of the mind. Presence, however, is not a mental achievement. According to Ibn Arabi, true presence does not require direction because it is not something entered or attained. It is what remains when the movement of seeking comes to an end. Presence is not achieved through motion. It is obscured by it. Modern life intensifies this confusion. Psychological culture is saturated with self-improvement frameworks, productivity systems, and optimization strategies. Individuals are encouraged to constantly refine themselves, follow methods, and measure progress. As a result, many people develop a chronic sense of being not there yet. From a psychological perspective, this reflects the dominance of goal-oriented cognition. Attention is persistently displaced into future-oriented mental simulation planning, evaluating, anticipating outcomes. The mind becomes structured around what is missing rather than what is present. Neuroscience. This pattern is associated with persistent activation of the task-positive network, which supports planning and execution. While essential for action, prolonged dominance of this network reduces access to present-moment sensory integration. The system designed for doing overtakes the system designed for perceiving. The consequences are clear: anxiety driven by perpetual incompleteness, difficulty resting even during inactivity, and a sense of internal pressure that does not resolve with achievement. The core problem is structural. Presence is treated as an outcome of direction rather than as a pre-existing condition. Ibn Arabi addresses this confusion by redefining what presence actually is. Ibn Arabi is often misinterpreted as a mystical poet offering inspirational advice. In reality, he is a rigorous metaphysician of being and perception. His work is concerned with how reality appears to consciousness and how misinterpretation arises. His central ontological claim is simple but radical. Existence is always present. Absence, he argues, is not an ontological condition but a cognitive construction. What feels absent is not being itself, but attention displaced by thought. He distinguishes between presence and attention directed by conceptual activity. Presence is not produced by effort. It is the default condition of consciousness before interpretation, comparison, or evaluation takes place. Thought may shape experience, but it does not generate awareness. This framework anticipates modern distinctions between primary awareness and executive attention, as well as between phenomenological presence and goal-driven cognition. Ibn Arabi's insight reframes presence not as a skill to be acquired, but as a condition that precedes all skills. One of Ibn Arabi's foundational insights is that presence exists prior to intention, method, or choice. Direction implies movement towards something that is not yet here. Presence, by definition, cannot be approached in this way because it is never absent in cognitive science. This principle is well established. Awareness precedes decision-making processes. Conscious registration of sensory input occurs before cognitive evaluation and before intentional action. You are aware of a sound before you decide what it is. You experience sensation before labeling it. A simple real-world example illustrates this clearly. When you hear a sudden noise, awareness of the sound arises instantly. Only afterward does the mind identify, interpret, or judge it. The presence of perception is immediate. Direction and interpretation follow. The key insight is this: direction is essential for action, planning, and problem-solving, but it is irrelevant to presence itself. Confusing these domains produces unnecessary striving. Presence does not need to be reached. It needs to be recognized as already operative. Ibn Arabi offers a precise critique of seeking. Seeking presupposes lack. It assumes that what is sought is currently absent. When applied to presence, this assumption becomes self-defeating. Psychologically, seeking activates attention bias toward imagined future states. Attention is pulled away from immediate experience toward mental projections of improvement or arrival. From a neuroscientific perspective, increased mental simulation reduces sensory immediacy by prioritizing internal models over direct perception. A common example is the instruction to focus on the present moment. When treated as a task, this instruction often produces tension. The mind monitors itself, evaluates performance, and generates effort. Instead of presence, self-surveillance appears. Ibn Arabi's clarification is subtle but decisive. Presence does not disappear because it leaves. It disappears because attention is displaced. Presence does not need reinforcement or effort. It requires interference to stop. When seeking subsides, presence is revealed as uninterrupted. Another widespread misconception is that presence implies passivity or inaction. Ibn Arabi directly rejects this assumption. Presence, in his framework, is not withdrawal from engagement. It is engagement without internal division. Modern psychology describes similar states through the concept of flow. In flow states, attention is fully absorbed in activity without self-referential monitoring. Action becomes efficient, responsive, and adaptive. Neuroscientifically, these states are associated with reduced default mode network activity while task performance remains high. A skilled musician, surgeon, or athlete provides a clear example. During optimal performance, there is no constant self-evaluation. Awareness is fully engaged with the task, not fragmented by commentary. Presence enhances function rather than diminishing it. The key implication is that presence is not opposed to effectiveness. It is its foundation. When internal division ceases, cognitive and behavioral efficiency increase. Ibn Arabi deepens his analysis by locating direction within. Conceptual differentiation. Direction arises when the mind divides experience into before and after, here and there, now and later. Being itself, he argues, does not move toward itself. Philosophically, direction is relational. It presupposes separation. Presence, by contrast, is absolute. It does not depend on comparison or movement. From a psychological perspective, this distinction parallels the difference between mental time travel and immediate perception. Mental time travel allows planning and memory, but it also creates existential tension when treated as primary. When mental orientation is mistaken for ontological necessity, life feels perpetually unfinished. The problem is not direction itself, but its misapplication to presence. a paradox now becomes clear. The more techniques people apply in an effort to become present, the less present they often feel. Cognitive science explains this through the effects of effortful control. Increased effort amplifies self-monitoring, which fragments attention. Ibn Arabi's position is not anti-practice. He recognizes that practices can refine attention, stabilize behavior, and reduce distraction. However, he insists that practices cannot generate presence because presence is not an outcome. The misconception lies in confusing refinement with creation. Practices may remove obstacles, but they do not produce what is already fundamental. Presence is uncovered, not constructed. When this distinction is missed, effort replaces clarity. Translating this framework into modern life involves subtle but practical shifts. One such shift is reducing future-oriented monitoring, less constant evaluation of whether one is doing it right. Another is allowing attention to settle without instruction, without turning awareness into a task. Psychologically, this reduces cognitive fatigue and improves emotional regulation. Neuroscientifically, it supports balanced autonomic regulation, allowing the nervous system to shift fluidly between activation and rest. In practical terms, this approach enhances stress management, decision-making under uncertainty, and interpersonal presence. Conversations become less performative. Decisions become less reactive. The key distinction is orientation, toward clarity rather than toward arrival. Presence does not require arrival because it is not elsewhere. In summary, presence does not require direction because it is not something to be reached. It is the ground from which all direction arises. Ibn Arabi dissolves the assumption that awareness must be achieved through effort or movement. Direction organizes action. Presence grounds perception. Confusing these functions creates unnecessary tension. When seeking ends, nothing new appears. What was already present becomes unobstructed. This is not a mystical conclusion, but a rational one. Presence was never missing. Only attention was elsewhere.